friends, to Ice Cave Radio. This is episode number 40, the Big XL, my friend. We are there. I am Flake. This is Charmer. Doa, last minute, got called to the Outer Rim. So,
yeah, he was all set to go, and then unfortunately was told he has to smuggle some more things, so he had to
whoa,
check
don't say
the
that.
secret compartments.
Don't say that. I cannot have my face associated with that word after what happened to me at U.S. Customs.
That's exactly why I chose this Star Wars analogy, actually. But
No. I am not going down that route. Ultimately, though, yes, I was supposed to be in Los Angeles yesterday, but that's not the case. So, hey, way to go. Thank you, U.S. Customs, for your vigilance in keeping me out of the United States. It is what it is. We're a Star Wars podcast, though, specializing in Star Wars Unlimited, the card game. Oh, yes. I did keep an emergency pack, and I had to basically bite my tongue all yesterday to not rip this out of anger and open it up. So we're going to maybe hold on to it today. But we are going to talk about some cool stuff today. Again, Doa's not here, but you got Flake and you got Charmer.
Unfortunately for you, because you could have had Flake and Doa, which would be outstanding, but you're stuck with me. But that's all right. We will make the best of this.
We will make the best of it. So what are we talking about today, man?
Well, we're going to talk about sideboarding. So the reason that I say unfortunate for you all is because whenever you start talking about like deck theory crafting and things like that, I get really excited and I tend to be a bit long-winded. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm actually really excited about this episode. But we're also going to cover the headlines because we do that all the time. And there is actually some legitimate headlines, I think, to discuss this week, which is also exciting. We're hitting that stage of this game's life cycle. But first and foremost, we have to do what we always do. We always start with the cave poll of the week.
All right, so Cave Poll every Sunday at Ice Cave Radio on Twitter. You can go ahead and participate. Another great place to go ahead and discuss the Cave Poll is our Discord server. I am going to take a gamble here and say that by the end of this recording, or by the end of the day, or easily by the time that this gets published on Saturday, we will have over 200 people in the Discord. And it's bumping, baby. Every channel is getting some traffic. Everybody's talking about deck brews, their polls, strategy, events, everything like that. It is a awesome place. There's pictures of food, of animals and creatures. Everybody's sharing all that love. So I do invite you there. But the cave poll this week, Charmbaka, is very simple. This one was suggested actually by Doa, who's not here. The cave poll of the week is: which of these Star Wars Unlimited leaders do you feel is most underrated? So again, only 4 options, so sorry if we didn't get to yours. The options are Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, Grand Inquisitor, and Chewbacca. So I'm going to ask you, Charmbaka, who did you vote for in this poll?
I voted for Grand Inquisitor, and it's not because I necessarily think that he is the best of the bunch as much as I think he is, as the question says, the most underrated. I think that Chewbacca is also pretty underrated, and I'm going to talk about a Chewbacca deck list later when we go over our sideboarding. And I will talk about the strengths of that, but I feel like Grand Inquisitor is one of those leaders that everyone is saying, like, he looks like he could be part of something cool, but I don't know what to do with him. And I think there's enough tools now, even in set 1, to like legitimately use him viably. So I feel like he's the most underrated as that result, right? I think people right now are saying like he'll maybe be good in the future, and I think he's good now. Maybe not like win tournament good, but good enough that can absolutely steal some games from people with the suite of available options in set 1.
I voted for Cassian Andor, and this isn't a very scientific vote for me. It's not a well-calculated one. It is merely a hunch, and the hunch for me is the fact that any time that you can draw cards, you are probably going to have a pretty high power ceiling or to that degree. And at the moment, a lot of people have sort of seen Cassian Andor without necessarily diving into the nitty gritty and money of the weeds that are Star Wars Unlimited, and immediately said, that looks like a pretty strong hero. But in practice, not necessarily as much. I did play against a Cassian Andor at Invasion in Toronto, by the way, which is a great shop. If you're in Toronto, go to Invasion. They have unreal amounts of singles. They ripped more packs than anybody else. They have a robust singles catalog, and of that and Flesh and Blood. I think that in Toronto, nobody does Flesh and Blood better or has more product available than Invasion for Star Wars as well. I know I'm on a tangent here, but I went there with Jordan Kennedy and Elaine Hammondtree. Elaine, one of the biggest Kasai fans from Flesh and Blood, and she's like, well, I want to let me know what's the price of a Marvel Kasai, because that's her like holy grail. And he's like, well, what are you willing to pay? Like, and she's like, well, I've seen them go for like $600-700 US at their peak. And he's like, well, we got it at X price. And she's like, that is significantly less than I thought. And he's like, oh, and that's in Canadian. And she's like, even better. And then so she pulled the trigger, and then just to show you how much stock they have, he's like, well, here's the 4 Marvel Kasais we have. You could pick the one that you want, like based on the condition. And it's like, holy crap, they just have tons. Anyway, that's where we went. So I played against somebody who was playing Cassian Andor, and they beat my Palpatine because I had no clue what the hell was going on. I was like, what are you doing? It was a gritty fight. So I said Cassian Andor merely from the fact that any hero that draws you cards is always going to have something there, you know?
I agree. I will say, I feel about Cassian Andor the way I think most people feel about Grand Inquisitor, where he is good, but needs like 1 or 2 more sets to really hit his stride, because this is going to be maybe a hot take. I think he is a really good control leader. I think that the drawing the card, most people look at that, and especially because he's got the aggression aspect, they're like, okay, well, he's supposed to be the aggro hero. But obviously Sabine with the direct damage is very enticing there, lower to the ground in terms of deploy. I feel like Cassian is going to be best in like mid-range or control, where you're using that extra card as choice, right? You're giving yourself more resources to always have the right answer at the right time, for example. And I really do think that, you know, cards like Zeb, you know, also need to find a home. I think he's really strong in a potential control style deck or whatever. So in the future, it would not surprise me if we see either a mid-range or a control Cassian kind of pop up and start being really popular.
So the results for the cave poll this week are such: Grand Inquisitor with the win at 39.7%. In second place, Chewbacca at 30.5%. Cassian Andor at 17 even. And Jyn Erso in last at 12.8%. That is the cave poll, friends. Again, every Sunday at Ice Cave Radio on Twitter. All right, we do have headlines this week, which is nice. And,
yes.
And we're finally getting some headlines related to stuff that I know you and I are very hungry for, which is competitive play. So our headlines this week, brought to you by nobody right now, but it's open for business. We have a 90-person tournament that went down in Poznan, Poland, and it was won. 90 players, by the way. Pretty big deal. It's a pretty hefty tournament. It was won by David Mrowczyński, I think is how I'm pronouncing it. So David Mrowczyński on Krennic. So Krennic won the tournament. And if we go down the line here, before we comment on this, Boba Fett, second place. And in the third, fourth category was Iden Versio and Sabine. So only one Sabine in the top 4, but a 4-pack of different heroes and different play styles in that top 4.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to see diversity. I know that there's going to be some talk about aspect diversity, right? I know that there was a lot of green, for example. But when you're looking at what I would describe as, you know, leader diversity, or, you know, the flesh and blood equivalent of hero diversity, it's great to see 4 different characters in the top 4. And as you said, kind of different play styles. I think the two that are closest are probably Iden and Krennic, right? They're both likely going to be a little bit more controller, a little bit more late game oriented, but I think that they pilot a bit different. Fett tends to be a bit more mid-rangey and value oriented, and then obviously Sabine is the Lightning McQueen of SWU right now. But I liked seeing 4 different leaders in the top 4.
I did no Palpatine, but I do get what you're saying. I think that I don't have the deck lists besides the winning one. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll have the whole deck list on the screen there. But ultimately, David's deck runs Energy Conversion Lab. Pretty sure if you're putting green, it's because you want that base. Like, obviously, green is very strong. The green base is also crazy strong. And for all of you who are holding on to a Hyperfoil Energy Conversion Lab, congratulations, because even a Hyperfoil Tarkin Town I was going to buy one thinking that how much could it be? $10. It was 45 Canadian dollars for I don't say unplayable base, but for a not so, desired base. So I can only imagine what an Energy Conversion Lab Hyperfoil goes for.
The last time I looked, now granted this was about a week ago, so maybe it has spiked. The last time I looked, Hyperfoil Energy Conversion Labs were like 45 US. And I was making the argument that that's actually an outstanding price.
Oh, it is an outstanding price. I'd snap that off. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a permanent game piece, right? When you think about the things that are most expensive in Flesh and Blood, part of it is rarity, but part of it is, the equipment pieces are always expensive because they're always on the board or they start in play. So for this game, it's the same thing. Leaders and bases, I think, are going to be your 2 premium pieces. And so if I can always have my cool base in the best blinged out rarity, yeah, take that. Absolutely.
Oh, big time. Absolutely. That's why when I'm talking about like blinging out the deck, I think that the high end is like, if there's a leader that I'm just absolutely all about, which right now is Palpatine. If I had a good price on a Showcase Palpatine, I would pull the trigger on it because, like you said, it lives on the board. It's always there to be seen. Same thing with the bases. If there's a Hyperfoil version of it, that's the one step up that I would take. Everything else, I just want the standard hyperspace versions of it, but that's where we're at. And I think for headlines, I think that's about it.
Yeah. The big piece for me, though, as far as headlines go, is that this is interesting because I feel like there are some sleeper inclusion cards in the winners list, as well as some, arguably or notably cards that are missing in many respects, right? So when I looked at this list, I was a bit surprised, for example, that they were on Cell Block Guard and not the Emperor's Royal Guard, despite having a decent number of officials. Now, I know that that's a bit of a player preference thing, but was a little bit surprised. The other one that really jumped out to me was so many Star Destroyers, like 2 Avengers and a Devastator. Obviously, those are very good for the mirror, and we have some more in that sideboard, but that just felt like they were planning for games to go long. It's almost like they felt like they didn't need to respect Sabine. And maybe that's a local meta thing. Maybe that was a playtesting thing and they felt comfortable with their main deck even into that matchup. But I did find that interesting that this is actually a pretty top-heavy list when you look at it.
It is. It's very top-heavy. You've got 5 total Star Destroyers plus 3 8-drop AT-ATs, so but the AT-ATs heal, which is nice. You also have the Juggernaut that heals as well, like the tank. I mean, we can definitely dive really deep into this, but you're right. And the reason why I don't think there's any Royal Guards is because they're not built-in Sentinel and they're not +1 health total, right? So you're not going to get the +1 health total. They're not 3/5s. They're going to be 3/4s. And yeah, that's a better stat line for sure than the Cell Block Guard. But without an official on the board to give him Sentinel, I think the reason why you run Cell Block Guard is purely because you just want to drop a Sentinel without having to worry about it. And keep in mind,
absolutely.
Darth Vader is not an official, which makes me because if that were the case, if Darth Vader was an official, then you always tutor out the Royal Guard because it becomes a 3/4 Sentinel.
I think that's a balancing thing that was done for sure with this particular version of Vader. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good
point. I will
point.
also say that this is vigilance, and this is a discussion that we've had, back and forth about our Palpatine decks. I also feel like the Royal Guard is a much better inclusion when you are green-red, because if you are running both Overwhelming Barrage and Bombing Run, for example, that extra point of health is far more relevant, right? Having a 3/4 is far more important if you're still planning on bombing running that lane as opposed to the 3/3. So.
Agreed. Yeah, you're not wrong there. All right, let's get to the main topic of the show today, which is the science of sideboarding. And this was inspired by, well, we kind of talked about it last week. We're like, hey, we should do a whole episode about sideboarding, but we were going to do it maybe a couple weeks into the future. However, we got an email from Sam W. Who emailed icecaveradio@gmail.com, says, hey boys, thanks for the great podcast. Is there a Sideboard 101 episode coming? I, for one, could really use it. I see people talking about sideboards on Deck Tech videos, and we have X in the sideboard to play against Y deck, but they never really talk about what cards to swap out of the deck. If you do a sideboard episode, can you please have a portion where you look at a complete deck and sideboard and show how you would swap the cards in or out? Thank you, Sam. You got it. Hey, we're people of we're a podcast of the people here, so that's what we're gonna do. So I think a good way to approach this, Charmer, is maybe you and I give a little bit of the very basics of the art of sideboarding and what a sideboard is for, and then I submitted a deck and you submitted a different deck, and we can talk about how we built it and what the sideboard is there, and then we can talk about matchups and in and outing stuff. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair.
Do you want to kick us off, buddy, or you want me to sort of fire away?
I can kick it off as far as talking about like the very basics, right? The 101, if you will, for what I look for when I'm building my sideboard, right? So when I am trying to build my sideboard specifically, I think about what does my deck already do well, and then what does it do not well against, right? Like what are either my really bad matchups and can I shore those up? Or the other thing that is a strong consideration, and we'll talk about it when we look at my actual deck, is what are cards that are silver bullets that by themselves give you a really big advantage in certain matchups. So those are the two big things that I'm typically kind of considering when I'm doing this, right? It's what are either matchups that are really bad that I'm trying to shore up, or are there any versions of cards in some matchups where, like, if I have that, I just have a huge significant advantage if my opponent doesn't have it or didn't plan for it, that sort of thing. Now the last bit is in certain metas, right? So if you have a meta where you really expect a lot of a certain deck and you are still trying to kind of plan for a wider field in your main deck, but if you run into that deck, you've got dead cards. Sometimes your sideboard is also just like filled with other things that would go in your deck if that deck wasn't wild in the meta. And then you just kind of rebuild what would be your thing if, X annoying deck didn't exist.
To me, sideboarding is, like you said, there's going to be matchups. Your deck is doing one thing. Your deck is built to execute in a vacuum. This is my win condition. This is what gets me there. For the deck I submitted, it was Palpatine, obviously, and it's a Palpatine blue with vigilance. And ultimately, it is what wins me the game, and how do I get there? And we talked about this in the previous episode about the basics of deck building. So ultimately, you want to build your deck to execute on that. And then what I do when it comes to sideboarding and main decking is, and this is I think something that perhaps a lot of players might debate on, but my stance on this type of thing is I tech the main deck for what I suspect the most of the meta will be, because I don't want to go into game one knowing that I've already lost, and therefore I have to rely on proper sideboarding to win games 2 or 3. I'm going to go in protect against my already hardest matchups, or sorry, the most common matchups, which for me is going to be like Sabine, obviously, and more aggressive things. So that's how I built the list. So I'll throw up, we'll go through my deck first. Is that cool?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to put up the Senate, because I am the Senate, by Flake. That's my deck. This is the deck I'm currently running. This is the deck that I have all the cards for. So anything that is on the screen that you guys will see, and I'll put a link in the descriptions of stuff as well. However, if you're watching on YouTube, you will have the benefit of seeing all the cards. But essentially, I'm going to run through the deck really quick so that if you're listening, you know what's in it. It's Palpatine and Dagobah Swamp. The Swamp, instead of the other blue base, the rare blue base, is purely from the fact that the security complex, I think it is, I just need the 5 extra life. You need the 5 extra life.
5 extra life is more important than the shield.
So we've got Inferno 4. These are all 3-ofs unless otherwise specified. Inferno 4, Scout Bike Pursuer, Regional Governor, Entrenched, Yularen, Death Trooper, Power of the Dark Side, Royal Guard, DJ Death Star, Star Viper, Resupply. I have a single of Boba Fett. I have 3 takedowns, Vanquish, a 2-pack of Overwhelming Barrage, 3 Academy Defense Walkers, 3 Vaders, 1 Super Laser Blast, and 1 Avenger. This is the main board. So why is this the main board? Well, because if you notice, there's a lot of early game stuff to compete with Sabine. Every game I've played this deck against Sabine, the only times I win are because I'm trading early and making very favorable trades early in order to keep the board at bay. And then when things turn around on that eighth turn, my win conditions come into play. I steal their biggest unit. I own space. I super laser the board when I have to, if I have to. Otherwise, Vader takes care of stuff, and then I can do a lot of removal in space. That is how I've built the deck. And then we have the sideboard. So what is the sideboard strategy? Well, I'll run through it. 3 Del Micos, 3 spacecraft, the 3/4 Sentinel spacecraft, 2 Rooks, 1 more Super Laser Blast, and 1 Relentless. That is my sideboard. So the strategy for this, again, is I tech to beat Sabine. That's the main deck. Everything in the sideboard is meant to shore up mid-range and control. So that's why I have a Relentless, another Super Laser Blast, the 2 Rooks are there. If it's a space-heavy deck, I've got the 3 extra space units, and Del Mico helps in the control matchup as well, or against Cunning as well, because of all the events that are being played. I've been talking for a bit here, so I don't know if you want to jump in and make a comment, but we can discuss a little bit about the strategy of the sideboard as well. And
no, I mean, I was letting you do your thing, and I was curious to hear about your sideboard strategy because, like all things, whenever we look at decks, we have opinions, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, I look at this and I'm like, there are, like, if it was me piloting this, like, there are some changes that I would make both with your sideboard and cards in your main deck, mostly because I think that it would make you better against Sabine. So I want to hear more about your sideboard strategy before I jump in.
Right. So again, and when I say I'm teched against Sabine, I'm also not fully all in. There are cards in the sideboard that will help me deal with Sabine-related nonsense. However, at the same time, I also need to make sure that I'm not completely run over by mid-range, or I'm not run over by a control matchup as well. So in this case here, so when it comes to sideboarding, let's say I need to sideboard into an aggression list. The strategy here is that you want to take out anything that is way too slow, because typically if you're playing against aggro, you don't need a Star Destroyer to win the game. If you're going to win the game, you're going to win the game from turn 5 onward by just taking all their threats off the board, and you inherently getting better as the game progresses. That's where you drop your 3, your 6 drops. Vader will then change the dynamic of the game, and then you have a Palpatine to steal whatever they might have. So how do you sort of shore up that matchup even more? I mean, if I'm really worried about Sabine, I would probably take out Avenger. I would probably take out Super Laser Blast, and I would take out the resupplies, and I would put in the 3 Delmicos for or more early game drop with restore. Now, some might disagree with me. I've never felt comfortable playing resupply against when I had another 3 drop to play in that regard. You have the super laser techs, which are good. I'd also play the spacecraft because the red squadron and the green squadron stuff that goes in space is a pain in the ass that you need to deal with, and you can't always devote a takedown or you won't always have a clean power of the force of the dark side rather to get rid of them. So there are options. If your game 1 goes so poorly that you need more bodies on the ground, there are options to shore that up, or if they're even heftier in space, you can do that. On the opposite side, if it becomes a slower game, there's plenty of opportunity here. That's where you want to put in your Rooks, your other Star Destroyer, and your other Super Laser Blast in instead of things like your, I'd say, you probably don't necessarily need the Boba Fett in this case, even though it's kind of cool. Death Troopers are awesome, but if it's a slower game, I don't know if Death Troopers are really going to get you there. Ultimately, though, in the control matchup, I'd even probably, it depends. If it's a Palpatine mirror, and this is going to sound weird, again, what people might not know is that 50 is the minimum that you present. So in a control or a mid-range that you know has late game, I would honestly just probably wheel everything in there and play 60. And I know that's not going to answer your sideboard question, but in a Palpatine mirror, I've lost a Palpatine mirror to Jordan Kennedy because of fatigue and taking damage. In a game that I was in full control over, the math showed up that I was just drawing more cards than he was and didn't work out. So there's a little bit of the strategy there.
Yeah. So when I look at this, the sideboard strategy makes sense to me with the cards that you've included. I would also say I concur with you. I am not a fan of resupply into Sabine with this setup. If you were playing like a mid-range Boba Fett with green, I think keeping resupply in makes sense because your power turn is 5. One of the things when you're looking at your decks is you have to remember, like, when am I looking to like have a power spike? For Boba Fett, it's 5. And so being able to ramp on 3 and take some damage, but play my leader and an amazing 5-drop the following turn means I can catch up sooner. But with Palpatine, your 5 is less impactful unless you're hitting something big and splashy. So what are those big splashy cards? And so this was going to be my suggestion. I'm still firmly in the camp of, if you are running green and villainy, you should have 3 overwhelming barrages. Like I don't think there's a better removal in set 1. In terms of like what I would cut for that, I might consider like 1 defense walker in favor of 1 barrage, or maybe cut. Take the super laser blast, move that to the sideboard, cut something else, and then go 3 in the main. But I feel like there are very few cards that create such polarizing turns in the game, and that's one of them. Like, it just, when it works, man, it works, and it steamrolls. So that was something that jumped out to me. The only other thing that I was going to say, talking about like deck construction stuff, is that Entrenched is really good when you don't have a lot of space presence, and so I like it for that. But against Sabine, I think Entrenched is a bit of a trap. And if you're really more worried about Sabine, the card that and we'll see it in my deck list, the card that I've been having a lot of success with for trying to survive that early game is Make an Opening, because it heals, and in most cases it's removal. And even if it doesn't kill something outright, it usually brings it low enough that you can then value trade in with a unit, kill theirs, and yours survives because of the -2. So I've been very high on Make an Opening now that I've had a chance to play with it.
So my strategy with Entrenched ultimately is that you don't want to put it on their unit. Like if they, like you said, if they just have a unit in space that they've been hamming up and whatnot, you can just drop it on there and then ignore space and then not worry about it. What I like to do is that in like the turn 5 or 6 or so, where you've been fighting for the board and you don't necessarily have presence, but neither do they, you might entrench one of their big units that they've been supporting a lot of, and then maybe you take it on the chin from one of the other, like, 3 attack or 4 attacks that they have. But to me, the entrenched is more of a situation of like, I'm stealing that unit eventually. I'm going to take it away from you. It's not going to hurt my face, but eventually I'm going to take it from you with Palpatine and then either trade into your unit and then sacrifice it somehow. Like I'm going to, or do something with that or with the Palpatine ability, or I'm just going to keep it on the board and just keep plowing it into whatever you have on the board. Like that's my entrenched option. So I don't mind it. And as for the overwhelming barrage, here's the thing. Yeah, I'm well aware that it is an incredibly powerful card. I have never needed more than 1, maybe 2 of them. And I'm not saying that I shouldn't have 3, but again, this is a very initial look at a set at my Palpatine list that I've been working on here or there.
Well, and I agree with you. A lot of times you don't need more than 1. But you got to make sure you have it, right? Like I'm of that belief that like I would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And if I get like all 3, then I'll resource 1, right? Like
I would agree. I would probably do what you said. I'd probably cut a defense walker and add a 3rd overwhelming barrage. But in terms of like the sideboard, the resupply thing, when I'm up against Sabine, they usually come out. Like that's my game too. Is they come out, the Delmicos immediately go in. Depending on if they're how many space. If they're running like Alliance X-wings and stuff, then I'll jam in the spacecraft. But for the most part, the Infernos, like the Star Vipers, are so good. They are so good because you put them on the board, and then their Green Squadron 1, the Green Squadron A-wing is like, I'm either dealing 3 to face, or I'm losing my A-wing, and they keep their. It forces them to make the trade, which they don't always want to do, especially as an aggro.
a lot of them don't. I will say at my first like weekly play event, so I got to go to a weekly play event. Took Stark. I had a great time. Stark went 1 and 2, but he had a good time. I went 3-0 on a budget version of Sabine. I didn't have everything to run the exact version of Sabine I wanted to run. But I will say, I think one of the things that caught people off guard with me as the Sabine player was how willing I was to trade if it meant that the opponent couldn't then use it to snowball their board presence. So like round 1, I played a Sabine mirror, and I don't think I attacked the guy's base until like turn 5 both games, but I won 2-0 because what I did is I took every value trade and he damaged my base. And then eventually got to the point where like I had 4 units, and every time he played something, I would sack 1 to kill it. And then I just had board presence. Right. And so I think people sometimes forget like you can do that. So yeah, it's definitely, if you're a Sabine player and you're listening to this, I would say don't be afraid to trade into that Star Viper, because otherwise it's gonna be a problem.
Oh, it's
I'm
great.
a big Star Viper fan.
Like what I've noticed, especially in these Palpatine games, is like typically you're dropping 1 thing, they're dropping 2, so that you'll always be able to yoink the initiative. And when you do, you just you just send your Star Viper, and it's either 3 damage plus heal 2, or you trade with one of their space units that they have to develop, or you got free reign up there. I love having the Star Viper up there, but
well, and going even a step further as well, right? Having that Star Viper and having initiative means that you can set yourself up for an outstanding like overwhelming barrage turn, where it jumps up to 5, and if you can nuke a ground unit and then also take care of the space unit without having to trade into it, then you can just attack their base, and now you have free reign of the sky. And as long as you keep taking the initiative, you get the restore as well. So
just to sort of wheel it all back here, ultimately, the way that I approach deck building is that my main deck is going to basically be able to win in a vacuum, but ultimately I tech it to deal with the most common meta that I possibly can, because I don't want to immediately concede game 1 because I'm outclassed. So if aggro is popular, if Sabine is popular, that's kind of how I tech this. A lot of low drops, a lot of removal, a lot of stuff to trade with to get to the late game. However, there's support for that in the sideboard, and that's what the sideboard is for. The sideboard is there for you to enhance your matchups against different types of on the spectrum of decks, be it aggro, mid-range, control. There's no combo, but that's kind of what we're at here. So that's what my sideboard is for. The main deck, Sol, is teched to deal with the common meta, which for this one was aggro. And then the sideboard is to shore up your matchups against mid-range and control. So that is a very simple framework for deck building and sideboard science. Is you want to win 2 out of the 3 games, but you don't want to just give away the first one. The problem is like if you're sort of jack of all trades, master of none in your main deck, you're going to have trouble defeating decks that do one thing really well. If you can be like, well, I'm a little bit good against aggro and I'm a little bit teched against mid-range, I'm a little bit eventually one that commits all in into one is going to overwhelm you because you're going to run out of insulation against that particular style. So I've done my best to insulate against aggro, and then cards like Rook, cards like Relentless, another super laser blast, even Del Mico play roles from a mid-range to control aspect. And that's how I have built and sideboarded the Senate. But you already convinced me. And like, again, a lot of the progress of deck building comes from discussion, from playtesting.
Yeah.
Like, I started with 3 Boba Fett's in this, but then I realized I'm like, he's not always the best one. It's cool to cheat him out, but he's not always the best option. Most often, if I have like a free board, I'm taking either the Royal Guard, I'm taking a super laser tech, there's a Death Trooper.
Well, and the other thing with Boba in this list, I like having 1 because in the scenario where you're cheating him, you've made it till 7 resources. So you're a decent way into your deck already. And then Darth Vader gets to look through another good chunk of your deck, right? So you don't need to run 3 to have a good chance of hitting him. And even if you don't hit him, you've still got some good options that you can slap on the board anyway. So it's like a nice to have, but you don't end up with dead cards as often.
Yeah,
I like the 1.
And keep in mind, you're playing a deck that wants to get to 8 resources, possibly 9 to play the Avenger. But ultimately, if you draw him and you have, and like playing him for 5 is not the worst thing. Like you got resources to spare. The amount of Palpatine games I end my turn with like 2 or 3 floating resources. I'm like, it doesn't feel great. So there you have it.
And the other one last bit, when you talk about like deck synergy and deck building, since we're kind of having those discussions, the other reason that I'm okay with it as well is you've got some kind of built-in insurance with Inferno 4, because you can, like, if you see him early, you can just send him to the bottom as long as you haven't drawn him yet, right? So no harm, no foul there either, and you're not stuck with a dead card. So
what I've learned, well, I say learned, it was really fun to use Palpatine ability on your Inferno 4 and then stack the triggers. So it's like, look at the cards, scry them away, and then draw the one you want. Brilliant. So beautiful. All right, let's go to yours. Let's go to your deck here, which is definitely a different build.
Yeah, so this is a different build. I don't think until I put this in here, you've even ever seen this list.
Never. So this is brand new to me.
This is brand new. I'll also give this a bit of a preface. So you'll often hear me talk about, whenever I talk about any card game, planning for your local meta, right? So now that I've been to a weekly event and I got to see what was there, the 2 most common decks, and this isn't a shock really, but the 2 most common decks were Sabine and mid-range Boba Fett. So I said, okay, now is when I can like stretch my legs creatively. What is a deck that I think will be fun to play, off the beaten path, but still have game into Sabine and not auto lose to Boba Fett, right? So that's where I started. So this deck, I call it Unique Experience because on the ground, every ground unit is a unique unit, right? Like this is like named character Star Wars CCG style.
Strafing gunship, you liar.
I said every ground unit is unique. Yes. Once you go to the air, I do have Restored Arc and Strafing gunship, but for the people listening, so again, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll have the benefit of seeing the image. If you're listening, I'll do a quick run through. This deck runs Chewbacca as the leader and Chopper base as the base, much the same way that Flake realized, hey, the 5 health is more important because Cunning is my choice and not Energy Conversion Lab, though I do have a version of this where I run green, and there you absolutely run Conversion Lab because that
Dude, get out of an Obi-Wan with
yeah. Well, you can't do yeah. You can do some crazy things. But anyway, for this one, it's Chopper base because I wanted Cunning. And Now going through real quick, I have Greedo and R2D2. Both of those are doing two different things. I wanted a cheap one drop that could trade favorably up. So his 3 attack is mostly so that I can pay 1 and trade into a 2 drop and come out ahead on resources. R2D2 is the other end of the spectrum where he has 4 health. So he trades and survives pretty well or gets damage on things. So I'm running them as 1 drops. 2 drops are Restored Arc because the Restore is very, very good, especially in space. So if you're not contested early, it can help keep you healthy. Also running 3 copies of Leia. This is really good in the aggressive matchups where if you've got initiative, and a lot of times with this deck you do, you can tap down their best unit to buy you time and then use her to trade later. But also, when I talked about my ideas for deck construction, right, I wanted to not auto lose to Boba Fett, and I talked about those power turns. So a big thing that people do is on turn 5, right, they might be trying to play their leader Boba Fett and another powerful 5 drop. Well, when they deploy Boba Fett, I can spend 2 and not have him eat a unit immediately, and that's huge. Still have to deal with them, but the fact that they don't get immediate value from their leader for the low cost of 2 is totally worth running Leia there. I'm running 3 copies of Spark of Rebellion in the main. This is one of the few times where, we kind of talked about how you don't want to play to the field or try to be too good into everything, but this is like my one exception. Spark of Rebellion, I think, is a great catch-all card for a main deck, and it's one of the first things I sideboard out. And the reason I really like having it in the main is because game 1, when you don't know what you're running into, being able to see their hand gives you more info. It maybe lets you pick something you weren't planning for. It's just, I think, much more valuable in game 1, and then you can board it out if needed. Continuing on, 3 copies of Yoda because of the Restore, and he's a Force user, which will matter here in a minute. I run 1 copy of Jedi Lightsaber in the main because it's 3 for 3/3 worth of stats, but then on attack you can -2 something. So again, specifically, you slap this on a Yoda or a Kanan, who I'll cover in a minute, and suddenly it's very hard for them to die in combat. And this is also a deck that very much wants to attack into other units early. So you are very rarely attacking the base directly unless you just have an open field. So like, again, if Restored Arc is your only space unit, yeah, you attack the base. But a lot of this is you're relying on having bigger stats on your units, and you're just trading into theirs until you're wide on the ground, and then you control the ground through bodies. So Lightsaber helps you do that. Also, 3 copies of Make an Opening. As I said, this is growing on me a lot. It's very good into Sabine. You heal 2. You usually take out a unit. And even if you kind of come out on the wrong side of resources, like, yeah, it sucks to pay 3 to kill like a benthic 2 tubes, but you also healed 2, and you got rid of something that has synergy with the rest of their deck. 3 copies of Ezra because he's got great stats, has an outstanding ability. Also, he's a fat unit that you can activate Chewie for and get Sentinel for a turn. So really, really good. 1 copy of the Millennium Falcon. This could be more copies of it, but I've only ever felt like 1 is all I've ever needed. 2 copies of Waylay, much like the Spark of Rebellion. These are kind of panic buttons for, hey, if something happens that I wasn't expecting, you can just buy yourself some time. 3 copies of Kanan. Again, fat stats, has Restore baked into the ability. Also really good into other control decks because you're milling them. 3 copies of The Force is With Me. So far in this list, and we haven't even got through it, we've got, Yoda Force user, Ezra Force user, Kanan Force user. So we have a lot of triggers on Force, and then spoiler alert, there's more on the top end. This card is outstanding. It's just good removal, especially when your whole point is to be playing body-based removal anyway. So allowing you to increase the stats of a unit and then likely give it shield. It's basically like this is your 6th copy of Takedown, right? You got 3 copies of Takedown, so that's the next card, 3 copies of Takedown. But the Forces With Me is also just like 3 more copies of Takedown. You just eat stuff. 3 copies of Strafing Gunship because you want some space presence, but also, again, your whole point is board control through bodies, and this card does it outstanding. 3 copies of regular Chewbacca, just because, again, thinking about opposing power turns, right? Being able to either one, play Chewie when they don't have a Spec Force soldier if you're against Sabine, but also against Boba Fett. Boba Fett, the leader, doesn't kill this Chewie right away. So if you've been trading well on the board, you can play Chewie in response to their boba and not immediately lose a unit. And then the rest of the top end is 3 copies of Obi-Wan Kenobi and 3 copies of Luke Skywalker. Again, great late game units. You know, one is a big body, makes your other stuff bigger. The other one has restore and removal on a body. Both are force users to help you, again, with your force triggers. And 1 copy of Redemption because it's a giant sentinel in space, but also a panic button. So again, if you're against Sabine and you're low and you're afraid, all right, they're going to burn me out with like for a cause I can believe in or something like that, you can play Redemption and just heal 8 off your base. Like, who cares if you got a 6-1? Like, take the 8 health. Totally worth it.
Oh,
so that's the main deck.
Agreed. I like Redemption a lot.
Yeah, I love Redemption. Sideboard. And then, so I'll run through these and then I'll talk about like when you would bring them in and like what my reasons were for those matchups. So sideboard is 3 copies of Regional Governor, 2 copies of It Binds All Things, 3 copies of Vigilance, and 2 copies of Vanquish. So I said at the start of this that this is built to be good into Sabine and have like okay game 1 into Boba Fett. So what am I bad against? Well, I'm probably bad against other control decks, especially because I'm playing so many just like big bodies where if they've got their main deck Vanquishes, I'm going to struggle, right? So what do I bring in against other control decks? Well, I bring in Regional Governor because I can name cards like Vigilance to keep my big guys alive. I can bring in Vigilance, the card itself, because that can be removal, but also can mill cards. And so if you're going the distance, right, in a control versus control mirror, you can win through milling them. So 3 copies of Vigilance is really there for control. And then the Vanquish is the same thing. So Vanquish also comes in against control because they're going to likely have big bodies as well. And you want to take out their Star Destroyers. But also Vanquish usually comes in against Boba Fett just because they have some pretty thick mid-range cards that you'll want answers for as well. It Binds All Things is a card that I actually bring in for games 2 and 3 against Sabine very often, because again, you've got Kanan, Ezra, R2D2, Yoda, all these units with 4 or more health. So it's very easy for you to trade into a unit, get some damage on it. And then because we have so many force users, It Binds All Things becomes like I heal my unit and I kill one of yours. And for the low cost of 2, like that's pretty good. The other cards, if I'm not feeling that, or other cards that I also bring in are Regional Governor sometimes for the extra body as well. Spark of Rebellion comes out games 2 and 3 against Sabine. I think it's fine for game 1, but it's not something that you want. So some of those other cards are better suited for there. And yeah, that's the rundown. But my sideboard, you know, like I said before, I thought, okay, I'm built for this. What am I bad against? I'm bad against other control decks. They're going to have a better late game. How do I shore that up? Well, I make it so they can't kill my stuff, hopefully, with Regional Governor. I give myself better ways to kill their stuff with Vanquish, and I give myself an alternate win con in milling them through adding Vigilance.
That makes all sense. And again, it all comes back to the basic tenets of what a sideboard is, which is it's meant to sort of improve your matchups against things that your main deck is not already there to do. So part of that basic strategy when you're thinking about this, and again, Sam, I hope this answers your question and hope this is informative to everybody else who's listening, is the fact that if you are sideboarding something, your sideboard is there to help you basically plug holes that you did not know were there or did not anticipate already. Because at the end of the day, you can only really tech your main deck to really face off against one thing. Because if it's just teched against everything, then it's not really teched against anything, frankly. That's the truth of the matter. So when you're deciding what cards to go in, you got to think about it this way. When did I, think about it, when and how did I lose my previous game? Did I lose on turn 6 to too many units on the board? Well, right then and there, the big stuff that you're probably not going to play, get rid of it. Your 6, 7, 8 drops, those are the first targets that you should probably wheel out. Anything that's slow, that doesn't create a trade or does not mitigate the damage or really solve the problem at hand, that can come out. Against Sabine, against aggro, you want bodies. You want cheap removal. Opportunity for you to fight for the board early. And that's what it is. Like, 3 Obi-Wans is nice, a redemption is nice in this list, but if Sabine is running you over by turn 5, maybe you'll never get to redemption. You'll never get to 3 Obi-Wans. Maybe you side those out for other stuff. Like, that's just the reality of the matter, is when you're approaching these games, your sideboard is there to basically help you squash the problem at hand. So for Palpatine is traditionally, you want your deck's main goal to never stray away from what it's built to do. For Palpatine, it's go the distance, steal the game late, make it happen.
Yeah.
And your sideboard's there to help you.
One thing I would also say, like, if you're looking at my list and you're also like trying to figure out, how you survive that early onslaught from Sabine, I think people just forget what Chewbacca does sometimes. So when you activate him and you play a unit that costs 3 or less, you give him Sentinel for the phase. And so again, when you look at some of the ones I included as opposed to other cards, a lot of stuff with 4 health, like I said, Ezra, Yoda, R2D2 even, right? That's the other reason I love R2D2 in this list. He's a very cheap, like with Chewbacca activation of like, I played a 1/4 Sentinel. It might not kill anything, but that might eat 2 attacks from a Sabine player. That's the same as like gaining 4 health, right? Or I can play him as a unit, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of that. Sometimes it's also really annoying if, depending on their board state, you tap their best unit, but with Leia, but you also activated Chewie. And if you tap down their best unit and their second unit is Benthic 2 tubes and he's forced to trade into her, it just feels bad for them. So all sorts of like fun things you can actually do with Chewie to buy you time for some of those later things. And then same thing, Strafing Gunship is a nightmare for Sabine, just because even if they do have space units, it's usually bigger than all of them, right? It eats Red 3 with its 4 health. It eats, the A-Wings with its 4 health. It does a lot of work there. And then even against some of the other more mid-range or control decks, again, I'm a huge fan of Consortium Star Viper, but it eats that and survives? Strafing Gunship.
Agreed.
So love that card.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And not to mention the Strafing Gunship is there, where even if they play like a wing leader, right, to like beef up something, you could just trade it into the wing leader, and then they still have to address the gunship. So
or if I have a force unit, I could just the forces. So that's the other fun thing, right? The forces with me, it doesn't say that you have to like attack with a ground unit or whatever, or with the force unit. So if you have a force unit on the ground, you can still the forces with me on your Strafing Gunship and eat something in space, or you can the forces with me to have it eat something bigger on the ground because it can attack the ground. Like, there's a lot of really cool synergies there as well.
Oh, there's some good stuff here. Very excited to play it, but ultimately that's kind of a little bit about the basics of sideboard, or the science of sideboarding, as it were. It is an art, and I will never say that it's an easy thing, but that is where tournaments are won, or in the sideboard, is people who are aware of not just what their deck wants to do, but what everybody else's deck is most likely looking to do. And 10 spots is not a lot of spots. That is one thing I will definitely say. We are spoiled with like 15 card Magic sideboards. We're spoiled with Flesh and Blood, which are 80 total cards. So if your clean 60 is there, you've got a lot, at plus equipment, you've got a lot of space to play around with stuff. So that is most definitely it is an art form, and 10 cards is not a lot of cards to sort of shore up some matchups. But I think that is partially probably by design to a degree, Charmer, because everything that I have ever learned about this game is that the designers really like for fireworks and quick games. They don't want games to go the distance, although a lot of them do. And I'm going to become more worried about time limits in card games and ties in Star Wars U than I am about anything else. And I will impart this wisdom that was given to me when I played in my first and only Pokemon tournament of my life. I went to the Toronto Regionals, went with Austin Yost, and the one piece of advice I got, I believe it was from Pheno Black, who's a Flesh and Blood pro. He said, you have to be aware of the clock, because it's a best of 3 format, and a lot of those games are going to go the long distance. So if you win game 1 and you don't really have good odds to win game 2, scoop immediately and go to game 3, because it is not a fun experience to tie in that format. And I feel like that is some good information for this too.
Absolutely, especially if you're in a control V, control mirror. So like looking at my deck, if you don't have a good start or things are starting to go kind of awry and you're still in game one against another control deck, like just concede and get to the point where you can throw in your vigilances and speed through it.
Yeah. So there you have it. The Science of Sideboarding with 2 examples. My deck, the Senate, and Charmer's deck. Do you want to do a voice for it?
Unique experience.
The number one reason why AI will never catch on is because if that's what it is, turns into.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right. So let's say, Charmer, you're sitting at a deck at a tournament. You've got your main deck for unique experience. You're sitting down there. You're playing against a Palpatine, and you're like, "Oh man, I'm not gonna win this. I need to tech against this." And then you concede game 1, and you go to your deck box, and there's nothing left in there. It's empty. What do you say?
Who the stole my sideboard? Or I have a really bad feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I've got a bad feeling about it.
Quiet.
It is the Bad Feeling Mailbag every week on Ice Cave Radio. You can submit your questions to icecaveradio@gmail.com. That's how we came up with the topic of this episode from Sam. So you can email us there. We reply and read everything that goes there. But we kind of have a little bit of bias towards the people in the Discord. There's a Bad Feeling Mailbag channel in our Discord, and that's where all of our questions this week come from, and we've got a bunch of them. So, shall we begin, Charmer?
Yeah, I'll take the first one if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so this comes from Gollin32, and it's a very simple. Do y'all think we will get unit tokens, and if so, when?
You've discussed this multiple times, and I think that the flavor is definitely there. I think that this is absolutely something that we will eventually see, and I'm thinking about this purely from the capacity of clones. Like, you said it best. You said it absolutely best. You came up with a brilliant idea. What if there was like a blue base or a green base or whatever base or a red base that was like basically... It's the text on it is pay 2, tap the base, create a 1/1 trooper, like a clone trooper, and you can do that once a turn. It's not an epic action, but it's just like you have this little factory that poops out a 1/1 dude. And I mean, Hearthstone has it. They have tokens galore in that game. Magic has all kinds of tokens. I know that I play a lot of zombies, zombie tribal. I play a lot of angel tribal. You got all kinds of tokens for those as well. I genuinely believe that this is something that we will see.
I am firmly in the camp that we will see it. It's not if but when. I also, the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that it's a shame if they don't do it, because they've already laid the groundwork for cool ways to do it, right? So we have... in our packs, we have our bases, and then on the back, we have shield tokens and experience tokens that have cool art.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason we can't in future sets get bases that have, a clone or a stormtrooper token, and this is what also got me thinking about it, right? It's not even just like clone troopers or stormtroopers, but the X-Wings and TIE fighters and things that we have for space units are also kind of named variants, even in their most generic form. Like, we don't have just an X-Wing. We have Alliance X-Wing. We don't just have TIE fighter. We have the TIE fighter LN. So there's nothing stopping them from making like a TIE fighter, just TIE fighter token. That's just like a 1/1 space token. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then add in the cool stuff they do with their like weekly promos for play, so that you could get, like an alternate art version or something like that for your cool tokens. It's just like with Magic, right? Like, there's a bunch of different angel tokens and soldier tokens and whatever. I feel like flavor-wise, there's no reason not to. There's a lot of ways that you could do it. Game-wise, there's no reason not to. A lot of cool ways to do it. And also just from like, collectability and all of that fun, it's too easy of a home run for them to not do it. And knowing what we know about them now, that they're all card game players, like, come on. Like, are you trying to tell me that, Danny and Josh and all of those guys weren't already talking about like what cool tokens they want? Like, get out of here.
And like you said, there's definitely the framework is there. Like the breadcrumbs are laid for it as well. And even from a community perspective, the tokens I use for my Flesh and Blood deck are from content creators or artists within the community. Like I have a Quicken token that was designed, or a Seismic Search token that was designed by Mara Faris. I have a Quicken token that was given to me by some other content creators and whatever. And like, that's part of it. It's like a fun way to have that kind of expression. Now, this is the problem that I worry about, and I'll be completely honest and upfront about this, is the fact that FFG is already saying that you have to have a specific type of playmat. So maybe they're going to just kind of say, well, you can't have any custom tokens in competitive arenas. But in like, in which case, what does that mean for altars within the game? So look, if there's one thing that I would love for FFG to sort of throttle back on is things like the expression of personality within the game of like playmats, tokens. Now, obviously, there's going to be, limits to that. If there's a lot of very lewd stuff that I've seen at tournaments that I'm like,
yeah.
But
I mean, maybe I'm in the minority, but every time this conversation comes up, I always say this. I truly feel like it will not be enforced as strictly as the way that it is written, with the exception of like on broadcast at a large event.
Oh yeah, but that
right?
but that happens already, right?
That happens already with other games. But the reason that I think the rule is written the way that it is because they want, in my opinion, they want zero ambiguity when the time comes to enforce it. So, for example, right, like what you're talking about, if it instead just said it had to be like family friendly, somebody could have a very risque version of Slave Leia, and a parent could complain and they'd be like, what? Like, this is a character from the game and there's no like in between. But because they already have it in writing, like, no, it has to be an official game piece, a store owner has more, or a judge has more that they can say like, no, it doesn't fit this, right? Like to me, they're setting the baseline, and then it'll, like, I don't think at local play your store owners are going to let you not have stuff unless it's a problem, but now they have that tool in their toolbox should they need it. Similarly, I've also seen in other games, I'm not going to go too much into details, but I've been literally at Pro Tour events where somebody was disqualified for cheating, and they had to like stick them with a very specific way. They knew the person was cheating, and they had like 3 different instances, but because of the way the rules were and because of the way this person has been throwing a fit, they had to get them very specifically on something that they couldn't refute. It was almost like the way you get Al Capone because of tax fraud.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They
Tax
don't know what he's
evasion.
doing,
Yeah.
But what can you pin on him? And so I think personally that the playmat rule and all of that stuff is written so that they can just say like, look, this is it. If you make us go scorched earth, we will. But otherwise, like, I don't think that, you go to your first official event and they're going to be walking around like slapping people with a ruler because they don't have the right mat or something. That's just me personally.
Was this Battle Spirits?
I said I'm not going to name any game.
Well, you didn't name it. You didn't name anything. It's all good. All right, there you go,
Yes.
Golan. Thank you very much for that question. Next up, the Bocononist. I don't know if this is like, it's very close to like a bonobologist, which is what I am, a bonobologist. But so here it is for the mailbag. There has been a video on YouTube showing predictability for non-foil, non-hyperspace legendaries with up to 4 boxes in a row having the same set of legendaries. How frustrating would it be to get 8 boxes out of the 12 with the Rogue One grouping? So I'm not completely familiar what's within the Rogue One grouping, but I have absolutely seen this a million times, not just with this. So what the Bocononist is basically saying is that in a box, based on the collation and the printing, if you open, in this case, he's saying, whether it's whatever the card is, the legendary Rogue One or whatever is it Black Squadron 1 or Black 1? That's the legendary.
Oh no, it's black.
Black 3, black 1.
Black,
It's black
3,
1, I think. It's red 3. It's red
black
squad.
1. Yeah, red 3, black 1. Yep,
Either way,
black 1.
whatever the legendary is, it's like if you open that within the span of the 24 packs you open, the other 3 legendaries that you're going to open are going to be XYZ. And for the people opening that, they are not happy because XYZ is like aggression, command, and like something else that is not necessarily hyper playable. Like, that said, does it suck? Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely sucks. It is very frustrating. I would not want that to happen. I, however, have been lucky enough that has not necessarily happened to me. I have seen this also, Charmer, in Flesh and Blood, to the degree that in Flesh and Blood's History Pack 1, History Pack was basically they took the cards from sets 1, 2, and 3, made them white border, and put them into packs for these boxes, and they upped the drop rate of the Majestics in them. So rather than opening 4 to 6 Majestics in a box, you're opening 10 to 12. It's basically a way to sort of catch up your collection, but they were white bordered. There was talk about this where basically they said, if you open this or this Majestic, you can expect this Majestic and this Legendary. And the Legendary was the Tunic. So it was like a great omen. So a lot of people would go to the store, they'd buy a pack they'd buy 2 or 3 packs of History, and if they found that Majestic, they would buy the rest of the packs so that they can, because to them it was a good thing. So I'm not saying that this is good, because it's not, because nobody wants predictability when they're opening cards. And you might say, yes, I do. No, you don't. You actually don't. That said, it exists in a lot of other places based off of the fact that there's nothing mechanical that is truly random. So
and we also know that even if FFG sets certain parameters, there's like stuff that just happens by accident during the printing, right? We've seen it with Flesh and Blood again. But even with this, I would point to the discard cards that we've seen in the wild, right? Clearly, those are not meant to make it into the packs. Something happened, probably a small whatever, but there are errors when printings occur. So it sucks and it's not an excuse, but nothing is foolproof and infallible either.
Next one.
The next one is from New Chris. For the mailbag, I definitely felt going into the game that cunning was going to be the control aspect. You guys have said yourselves that cunning would be to Star Wars Unlimited what blue is to Magic. I assumed the most controlling decks would be Vigilance Cunning, but almost every control deck that I've seen has been Vigilance Command. Is cunning just underpowered right now? Am I misunderstanding the concept of control? And then they added an edit, or they had talked with Inception about this one, and they helped break it down for them. So as a follow-up question, they wanted to say, what would need to change in future sets for Vigilance Cunning to become the premier control aspect combo? So real quick, I would say you were so close. You are correct. We've referred to it as like the blue from Magic in the past. And I don't think, but here's the part. Like you said, am I misunderstanding the concept of control? I would say no. I think personally that you misunderstood our comparison to blue, because blue has 2 sides. And in Magic, there is very much the control side, but that's usually expressed through 2 things in Magic. It's counter spells that do not exist in this game, and like theft stuff. So like control magic, I take control of your unit. And we do see a little bit of that in cunning with like Change of Heart, for example. But the other part of blue is tempo, where you see cards like Unsummon, right? And in this version, it's Waylay. That is where I think that cunning is far closer to blue. And those are less about hard control and more about controlling the flow of the game to create windows of opportunity. And I think cunning does that very well. It's just that cunning is not a hard control. It is a control the flow or dictating the way the game interacts at different points in time. Does that make sense? Do you agree, Flake?
I do agree, and what you're saying is spot on. Because to me, blue is a it's sort of the extra sprinkles on your control sundae. It's basically, it's not the meat, it's the potatoes, right? Because the meat is going to be, when it comes to control, is basically getting rid of stuff altogether.
Yep.
Blue in Magic is counterspell. It doesn't mean, it's like you can consider it like all-out removal, but the thing never hit the board, so it's not necessarily removed. It never got a chance to be. But blue also does, like you said, it has a lot of unsummoned bounce effects, things of that nature. And when you talk about Cantina Bouncer, you've got Waylay, you got a whole bunch of stuff that just basically bounces things, which is very, like you said, flow of play. Mm-hmm. It gives you a chance to maintain a board state and develop above rate, because they may drop something for 6 or 7 and you may waylay it for 3. You now have 4 other resources to creep up the board state a little bit. Blue kind of does that. The reason why Counterspell, originally was a 2 blue spell, but they have most of them these days are 3 or 2 conditional. It's a 3-cost spell because you're going above rate. They're going to play a 5 or 6 cost spell. You're going to crush it with the 3. That's their whole turn. Now you got 3 more resources to do one of two things: develop something on the board, a threat, or keep those resources open so that you can counter something else that they want to do. But if it's on their turn, typically when the turn comes back to you, you untap your land. You're playing below rate, but you're putting them through this molasses style thick jungle of nonsense in order to even get to where they want to go. It's so that when you do have time, you can play your more controlling stuff, or the stuff you have on board is good enough. It is the most frustrating color, this blue, because nobody's going to get more upset than when you play blue against them. And ultimately, I mean, it also has a couple of the effects of black as well, with Thoughtseize and things like that. So
sure, and that's also like paired with heroism or whatever. The other comparison to blue is also a color where you can tap or untap things. And so that manifests itself with all of the exhaust mechanics that we see in Cunning in Star Wars Unlimited. Again, not about hard control, but creating windows of opportunity, right? So Leia is another great example. Understated as a 2-cost 2/2, but creates windows of opportunity where, they deploy their leader and you can exhaust it for a turn and then buy yourself some time. Counterspells, I would argue, do the same thing, where they create those windows of opportunity. I think the other reason that you and I compared Cunning to blue very often as well is another hallmark of blue in Magic is evasion, meaning I can get to you through your blockers, right? I can attack you directly and you can't stop it as easily. And it just so happens that Cunning has quite a few units with Saboteur, which is like this game's version of flying. So there are parallels there. It's just that the one that I think most people immediately think of with blue is counterspells, and that's like a hard stop, and that just doesn't exist in Cunning. But all of the other aspects of blue are there.
Yeah, blue's get your thing off the board is bounce. It doesn't have destroy. It doesn't have exile. Destroy is a black effect. Exile is typically a white effect. Green is the fight effect, and blue is the bounce effect. Like, that's the removal aspects of it. But the hardest of control, like, I would put vigilance, like blue, like Star Wars Unlimited blue vigilance aspect, as white, and I would put aggression as red, definitely, and I would put, is command more so black? Is it like, is it green?
Personally, I think command is green.
Yeah, because something like strike down.
You've got units that are overstated for their cost. So when I think of something, for example, like Battlefield Marine, right? It's
2
simple,
drop 3/3, baby.
But it's effective because it's just big, right? So like I think command is closest to green. But that's the cool thing about Star Wars Unlimited is there's no direct parallels, because then you sprinkle in, villainy and heroism, and that kind of changes the dynamic, because those have their own identities as well.
So the follow-up here is, what would you change in future sets for Vigilance Cunning to be premier control aspect combo? I think they're on the right track. I think that it's perfectly fine. If you're playing against a cunning and vigilance grouping, you're dealing with takedown, you're dealing with vanquish, you're dealing with waylay, cantina bouncers potentially. If you're like a double cunning aspect, or you want to just pay over the top, you're dealing with Spark of the Rebellion to like go ahead and just peel things out of their hand. There's a lot of cards that really freaking suck to deal with, like when it comes to that. So I think that it's on the right track. Vigilance has the hardest just crush you into smithereens cards that there are.
I have a pretty hot take here, or at least I think it's a hot take, which is I don't think you want Vigilance Cunning to be the premier control. I think that's a monkey's paw request where you don't know what you're asking for.
Oh yeah, no,
because as you said, like blue-white is one of the most annoying, frustrating things to play against in Magic. And one of the beauty, I think anyway, one of the beautiful things about the design of Star Wars Unlimited is that it is so board centric. It feels like we're interacting and that characters matter and combat matters. And the best way to make Vigilance Cunning become the control pair is by having them have a bunch of hard stops. And then that means the game also likely stops being so board centric. So like I would say you don't want that. Not in that capacity anyway.
No, that is very much a monkey's paw situation. Like, let's be completely fair here. Do you want more? They're going to print more. Don't get me wrong. But
yeah.
Do you think that they'll ever print something like Hexproof or Shroud in this game?
I do, but I think that it will. Well, okay. I don't. Let's back that up. I don't, but if they did, I do not think it would be a permanent aura. And if it was, it would have to be on some like expensive, unique legendary where like that's their entire thing. It would be like a one of, it won't be a frequent thing. Much the same way that like Han technically has first strike, but it's not rampant throughout, the set.
They have to explain it, right?
Yeah. But I could see them doing something where they say, like it's like a shield token, but instead it's like, if this would be defeated, remove this instead, sort of thing.
I could see it as kind of like a token, like you mentioned, but like it's like called like Mind Trick or something, where it's a token that you could potentially stack. It's something that you could put, but it's like imagine a card that's called like Jedi Mind Trick, where it's like put a, I don't know what you'd call the token, but it's like put a token on a Force character. The first time an event is played on this character, lose the Force token and the event is canceled. Kind of like it gives you like the Relentless ability, but just for that one character. And it might say like it comes into play with that token on it. And I don't know. That's just is it emergency pack time? Is that where we're at?
I mean, I don't think so. I think we've been pretty on the rails, but I'm not going to say no.
Yeah, I don't think we can say no. Let's just do it. Again, the emergency pack brought to you by nobody yet. But hey, maybe it could be brought to you by something that you do. Who knows? All right. Yeah, well,
this could be brought to you by Tampax. We're open to whatever.
This is a very. I told you, we talked before this episode about how I got denied entry into the United States for the first time in my life after traveling there like 20 times last year. So this is a pack that comes with a lot of angst. So we're going to open it up here for you. And how fitting. We get a Palpatinus.
We get a Palpatine, and I think we get a hyperspace base underneath it.
That is. We do. We get a hyperspace Kestro City, I think that is.
Yeah.
I cannot orient the cards properly. We'll get it done. So we do have a hyperspace.
See, it's
Kestro
saying
City.
Play Palpatine red.
It is asking for that for sure. Let's jump through them. So we got a Patrolling V-Wing. Moment of Peace. Ooh, one of the tanks. I was thinking about putting this out. I'm making a Palpatine red deck, and I was thinking about putting a Tarkin red. Why isn't focus on this? There we go.
There was just a bit of a glare, so it was struggling.
Gladiator Star Destroyer.
That's a card I think people are sleeping on, by the way.
Give a unit Sentinel for the phase.
Gives it a unit Sentinel, gives you a 5/6 body in space, and it's still in the like playability of Energy Conversion Lab. So
That's true.
There's a lot of stuff that thing can do.
I just don't play Energy Conversion Lab because I'm a Palpatine main. Vanquish, clean removal. Partisan Insurgent, great aggressive 2-drop. Cell Block Guard, that's a old faithful. ISB Agent, getting some glare there.
Mm-hmm.
Corellian Freighter. I think we're getting to the uncommons now. Entrenched. Talking about that. Entrenched. Ezra.
Love me some Ezra.
Give me the good stuff. No hyperspace cards yet. Colonel. The Colonel is here.
Yeah, I love Colonel Sanders.
Survey says... No, Security Complex.
Oh, Security Complex.
Yay. And the fun one behind it is a foil Asteroid Sanctuary.
All
right, well, rare bases are not fun to draw. However, I mean, we did get precisely the deck that I almost wanted to make, so there we go.
And red for the other one that I keep telling you to make. So
That is true. That is true. They're all there. The whole crew is there. No hyperspace in this. Oh, I guess the Kestro City. That counts.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. We have one more question of the mailbag. Go for it.
All right. From Cerulean Reap. Great episode again, guys. Keep up the good work. For the mailbag, as you've said previously, you're all long-term gamers like myself, although as I'm now just hitting 50 this week, well, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Says you're all a little younger. Not that much.
No, shut up. I'm so much younger, is what I'll tell myself.
Like yourselves, I started all the way back with Decipher's Star Wars and Star Trek CCGs. I imagine over the years you've encountered some pretty interesting nicknames, especially with the increase in online activity. What are some of the best Star Wars themed ones you've heard? And how do you think my own choice stands up, taking it, of course, that you've worked out its Cerulean Reap meaning? And keep going, and may the force be with you.
I'll be completely honest with you.
It's also just for those, because I'm saying it obviously, but the spelling on the end is W apostrophe REAP.
So what am I missing here? Because I do not know what this means, and I feel embarrassed because I'm not sure what Cerulean W apostrophe REAP. Like, what am I missing? Did you figure it out? Because
so I know that like just Cerulia as a planet, the Reap part isn't it didn't connect with me.
Yeah,
I'm trying to Google.
Is it like
if there's anything with the WREAP? Like that's what I just Googled was the W apostrophe REAP, and that wasn't coming up for me.
Well, first of all, happy birthday for the 50th, because that's a big deal. And the fact that you're still jamming games and you were there all the way back from Decipher days playing Star Wars, Star Trek, that's awesome, dude. Much appreciated. Thanks for being a friend of the show. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. I do not know. And I know that you're going to listen to this and you're going to jump into the chat and say, this is what it means. And then we will appreciate it even more. So I will. Okay. So when it comes to nicknames, obviously I'm trying to think of like some of the nicknames that I have seen over the years. I've been online since online was a thing. And I've seen some very generic normal ones, like when I used to play X-Wing versus TIE Fighter with my old joystick on my 56K modem. The group that I played with was a gaming group called LSF, Last Starfighters League, and we would play in these little tournaments, and I was really good at the game too. But ultimately, that group was named mainly of just like people with names like Red 9 or, random characters from like Legends books and stuff like that. Like we had a hobby, we had a catch, like the the fake the fake Ewok that was in one of the X-Wing books. There was plenty of different nicknames, but I don't know any of like ridiculous ones Star Wars related. But I will say this: my friend House is one of the best FPS players I've ever met. He plays a lot of Overwatch, and his ranking in Overwatch was he was like a GM, like a Grandmasters player or a Masters player or whatever, playing support. And when we'd play together, he had to make another account so that he could play with us because his ranking was too high for us. And every time he would make an account, sometimes he'd play it just to get the amount of experience needed so that he could play in competitive games, but then he would rank up too fast. So he had to keep making other accounts. And the theme that he would use was prequel memes. So he had a standard account, which was House. That was his like Grandmaster account. Then he had one called I Am the Senate. That was one of them. He had one called It's Treason Then. He had all kinds of silly prequel meme things. He had Hello There. That was one. And then he had another one called Pay Your Taxes. And that one to me just made me laugh. He had an account called Pay Your Taxes.
Yeah, I wish it was still up, and I'm ashamed that I, stopped paying for the domain a long time ago. So there was a time, before I was doing a lot of the card game coverage where I was very much, like a lot of people, I think, actually, but I was very much into MMOs. I led a World of Warcraft guild for a long time. We had like yearly meetups. And then when I finally stepped away from that game, a lot of the people I played with came with me over to Star Wars: The Old Republic. And I loved that game. And I remember that there were, like, I vividly remember that there were a lot of people whose character names for that were puns, but I don't remember them. And if I could pull up my old guild website that I used, like I would be able to do it, but it no longer exists. And that makes me actually like pretty sad.
I'm looking for I just Googled Star Wars name puns. There's Mango Fett, Darth Tater, Count Dookie, Ham Solo, Pizza the Hut, but I mean we know that one, right?
Yeah.
There's, let's see, Count Cuckoo. There's Qui-Gon Ginger.
Oh, so I do remember there was one year for fantasy football, we were trying to do Star Wars themed stuff, and somebody said they were going to name their team Qui-Gon Girl because it was right after the Gone Girl movie had come out.
There's the Italian one called Jabagool.
Oh, that's good.
I made that one up. A little Jabagool. I
got a friend of mine who lives in New York, and he's Italian, and he would actually love that.
He would love it?
Yeah, Tavares, if you're listening, Jabagool.
Where's the Jabagool? There's that. There's I mean, if you are into that kind of thing, we're talking about playmats with Slave Leia, you might have a Boba fetish.
Yeah, that's solid.
That's one.
Man, I really wish I could remember some of those ones from when I played. I remember. So I think part of the reason I'm struggling to remember is because the thing you have to know about Star Wars: The Old Republic is you had titles too. And I remember a lot of the puns were like based on the title that you could equip. So like Darth what, and you had prefixes and suffixes, right? So you could have like Darth whatever, or have like Captain whatever. And I just, man, I'm ashamed I don't remember them. This is inspiring me to see if I can go dig some of those up, and then I'll get back to you, because I remember that there were some really good ones, and I am drawing a blank right now.
There's so Canada has had for a long time. If you're Canadian, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They have a sketch show called This Hour Has 22 Minutes. It's basically like, it's not necessarily like The Daily Show, but it's a mix of SNL and The Daily Show. It's meant to talk about news, but it's done in a comedic way. And last week or 2 weeks ago, one of the CEOs or whatever of one of like our major grocery chains it was the CEO of Kellogg's or Post mentioned that cereal, they were like getting grilled about cereal prices, and he said that cereal
for dinner.
Yeah, eat cereal for dinner. So this hour has 22 minutes. Did the sketch where it was a family talking about their money problems, and then all the different cereal mascots came out trying to tell them, and then they're like, well, if you don't like this, if you don't want me Lucky Charms, you have options. And then this guy comes out, he's like they're like, who are you? He's like, I'm Captain Lunch instead of Captain Crunch.
That's
like,
funny.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. But
I don't know why, but when you started this, I thought that the sketch was going to be that it was like eat cereal for dinner, and so it was like a sketch where you go to some like fine dining restaurant, but they only serve cereal. You know,
that's where we're at, dude. Like, it's unreal, like prices for everything these days. But again, this would have been the emergency pack time for sure.
Yes, this would have been it. But
I mean, I can open, and I don't have any more Star Wars actually, so I can't open it. That was it. But silver lining, because I'm still. So funny part of it is we were recording this on March 21st at it's about 9 p.m. Eastern time. At 11 p.m., I have a call with a lawyer, an esports lawyer, who specializes in precisely what happened to me, which was getting denied entry into the United States because I didn't have documents that I did not actually need. So silver lining to all of this is that if they can't sort this out tomorrow, where I can't fly to Los Angeles tomorrow to go to Pro Tour, where I was scheduled and contracted to be, then I get to go to Harry Tarantula's Premier Play tournament on Saturday. So silver lining. I got to be optimistic because I don't know how else to properly convey this. I am both sad, angry, and worried all together, all in one gigantic sandwich. So that's where we're at right now. And that's the mailbag. So
that's the mailbag.
That's the mailbag.
Hooray, we ended on a positive one.
Woo! Thank you very much to everybody who contributes to the mailbag. Our Discord has surpassed 200 people. We are unreal happy and stoked about it. We are also going to be discussing a Patreon, potentially, if you guys want to help support us in that way. We're going to work on that. So let us know things that you would like to see in the Patreon, be it extra content, early access to things of that nature. And we don't want to price anybody out. We don't want to hide many things behind a paywall.
We're not a cereal company. Come on.
No, we're not Captain Lunch. Okay, we're not that. We're not going to follow our nose to all kinds of riches. It's not the plan. But it's something that we're going to work on. But ultimately, yeah, the main idea is that we want to continue to do this show for as long as possible. But sometimes things happen, and we're going to work on things. But yeah, send your questions for the mailbag to icecaveradio@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us at that charm3r, that's you, at watchflake, at ggdoa for our friend Doa, who's out in the field. And join the Discord. It's the best place. Drop your questions there. Join the discussion. Join the crew. Deck lists going on, strategy talk, rules questions. We also have a market that's actually working out for looking for, or I've got this for trade/sell. And people have been actually using that, and we're making that happen as well. So join us. Everything is happening as I have foreseen. Anything else you want to throw in there, buddy?
No, I think we're ready to wrap it up.
I think we are.
Mostly because I'm hungry.
No, I don't.
There's been pizza waiting for me for an hour.
Oh, sorry. I have I have a meeting with a lawyer at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
I know.
I don't know what the hell.
I have more questions about that, but we can do that.
My suspicion is that they're
Off
East
the
Coast.
air.
They sent me an email saying we'd love to talk to you. Here's a link to our availability. Choose what suits you best.
So it's not who. I was going to ask you some questions about who it is, because I thought I knew who it was, and I thought one of our mutual friends got you in touch with them. But anyway, we don't have to do this while we're recording.
No, we'll talk about it. All right, friends. We'll get to that. So next week I might be on the show. I might be in prison. Who knows how things go? We'll talk to you then. Thank you so much for listening to Ice Cave Radio. We will see you next week. And Charmer, as always, give us something to lean on.
May the force be with you.